So this morning I'm at Mckinney Falls State Park, located just south of Austin, Texas. And it's my first trip to the park, and which is weird because I live very close to it. But, you know, I'm going to tell y'all, it's worth the trip. It's very beautiful. The river is nice. The falls are beautiful. There's not a whole lot of water. This is not like Niagara Falls by any means, but don't let that sell you short. I mean, it's definitely worth the trip. It's very beautiful, the wildlife, everything. It's gorgeous.
Located just 13 miles from the state capital, Mckinney Falls State Park is a beautiful place where you can camp, hike, mountain bike, picnic, fish, and even swim. The obvious main attraction in the park is the waterfalls, to which there are two. Here you see the upper falls. Later I will show you what's known as the lower falls. Both showcase the beautifully formed sandstone, which has been a project of Onion Creek for thousands of years. The upper falls are easily accessible from the paved roads and can be crossed if the water level is low enough. My daughter was too small to play by herself down here, but she sure wanted to. This is definitely a slips, trips, and falls type area, so be cautious if you have very little kids. Be prepared to also carry them. This is not exactly an area I'd let them run loose in. The pool area for the waterfall is very beautiful and serene. It was almost a very bright green color, constant churning of the water. If I had my bathing suit, I would have jumped in, there's no doubt. This state park has nearly 9 miles of trails, this one being the 2.8-mile Onion Creek hike and bike trail. It does have a very good hard surface and is very good for bicycles and, in my case, strollers. One of the nicer features of this hike trail is that it is alongside Onion Creek, and there are several cut-throughs that allow you to access the river. This is one of those cut-throughs. I'd highly recommend stopping by and bringing your pole along. You do not need a fishing license to fish in Texas State Park.
Come here.
Access to the lower falls is either through a short hike from the upper falls, or can be shortcutted by going back on the main road and following signs. The walk is worth taking, but I would note that this particular part of the trails is going to start getting into the more labor-intensive stuff, so I wouldn't bring small kids, and definitely no strollers.
Mckinney Falls State Park is definitely known for its beauty, its elegance, its rock formations. But you know, one thing that I really, really love, especially in the morning, is just the quiet.
For 10,000 years, over 300 generations of Native Americans hunted, fished, and camped at this particular place. Spanish missionaries, revolutionaries, and settlers finally arrived in the area in 1716. They were all traveling between Mexico and Louisiana on El Camino Real de los Tejas, which is also known as the Royal Road. Most were passing through. In 1850, the park's namesake, Thomas Freeman Mckinney, decided to stay. Following Thomas was his second wife, Anna, and adopted daughter, Minerva Fannin. Along with them also came 14 enslaved people. Thomas was an old 300 settler and a wealthy slave owner who financed 10% of the Texas Revolution. Enslaved people on the property built 2 houses, a grist mill, which you can still see remnants of, and miles of livestock walls. They also hired a horse trainer, John Von Hagen, to run the ranch. Hundreds of sheep and purebred racehorses turned the prairie into pastures. After the Civil War, the enslaved people and John Van Hagen left. Thomas grew ill and passed away in 1873. With outstanding debts mounting, Anna remained to settle the estate. She sold this land to James Wood Smith in 1885. It looks like we've made it to the lower falls. As you can see, the lower falls are just as beautiful as the upper falls. The pond below wasn't as big, but I feel like it could be depending upon the water level conditions.
This is close to the end of September in 2021, and the water levels are a little low. This is my first time to the park, so I'm not so sure what the normal water level is or what it begins to be at any point. Hard to say because the rock formations are obviously many thousands of years old, but the water level seems to be relatively low, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away from the beauty that is this out here. I got up extra early this morning just so I could come out and be by myself. I assume that this park gets pretty busy. I was here yesterday and evening, and I didn't notice too many people, but there's a lot of parking spaces, so I imagine it could get busy here just south of Austin.
The Smith family that owned the land from 1885 to 1973 finally had enough of having to deal with the constant up and down of the water levels and land and the erosion. That time they donated the state park to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Program. And just in time for Austin having to blow up. I'm really glad that they donated it, otherwise we might not have this beautiful park here. I spent a lot of time down at the lower falls as there was a lot to look at and quite a bit of wildlife on my journey. I didn't go, but this is also the starting point for another some odd miles of trails that the park has to offer, including one that overlooks Williamson Creek.
So one of the neat things about the park, besides the trails, is a couple of just unique trails that they have. One of them is a rock. It's got a rock cover that goes over the top. I'll show you in a second. That rock cover trail was really cool. It's definitely a trail. It's not a walking path, so I wouldn't bring small kids, strollers, that kind of thing. It's not going to work on that, but it's a hike. But man, it's worth it. It's really not that far away from the parking spot. I think it's like 1/10 of a mile or something, but definitely worth the view. It's really cool to see how the river has changed, or the creek has changed over a significant period of time. It's just kind of wild to see that. I wonder what it would be like living in here as a Native American, thousands of years ago. The rocks were the same, I'm sure. We're making hell of a shelter. Although I don't know how it would work in a flood. I guess past indications that there's some potential flooding coming. It'd be kind of scary, I guess. Some of these trails, like the one I'm on now, can navigate up and down pretty easily, but for the most part, I just got to be careful. They're not too difficult. I would give them about a 3 on a scale of 10 here, but they're kind of some steep faces, and you got to go through various areas. This is an example of what I'm talking about. Kind of some tight spaces, so small kids might have a hard time getting through here, but it's still gorgeous, definitely something to get through. On another note, I wouldn't wear Crocs on this tour. This is a hike. I said earlier, I think that it was a 2 or something. There are some parts that are 4 and 5. You have to grab on and climb a bunch of stuff, depending on where you want to go. So,
If you're adventurous enough, you can go off these offshoots, like this particular one here, and get some pretty decent river access. It'd be really good for fishing, but it was kind of tough climbing up and down, depending on how much equipment you have. I almost lost a camera lens here.
So the park here does have some pretty old residents. This is Old Baldy, as an example. Old Baldy here is a cypress tree that claims to be 500 years old. That's a pretty big tree, pretty old tree. It's real neat to see that this has lasted this long. I've seen they call it a 100-year oak, which is huge, but it's a big old tree, man. Apparently Old Baldy was a 2012 Tree of the Year, which I find kind of funny because it's been probably the Tree of the Year for 500 years, but okay. So overall, the park has been a really good experience. Like I said, the trails are really nice. There are some more complicated trails, and when you get down to the lower falls, I can see at some points during the year where you have to cross over water to get to the second half of the trails. So be mindful of that. If you plan on doing a bunch of walking, mind you might have to actually go through water to get there. There appears to be no other way around, and the map says that way. Beyond that, it's worth a hike. I would go in the morning or the late evening to see the wildlife. I imagine during the heat of the day, you're not going to see what I saw. Lots of deer, lots of birds, and all the other, standard wildlife you see in a park in Texas. But man, just definitely worth doing. I would do it in the morning. So far, it's like 8:30, something like that. I'm the only person here. So let's talk park facilities for a moment. I decided to go while I was here and check out some of the other stuff that the park has to offer besides its nature trails and its waterfalls. And I will say it is a little lacking. Obviously, you're here for the nature, not necessarily the other amenities, but I have 2 very small children, so parks and things like that are kind of a must for some of these places I go to. The walking trails were great. Kids were able to go out and
enjoy the bigger trails. There are a couple of trails that are a little longer, bicycle trails that would be more appropriate for a smaller kid because of the evenness of the road. Every other trail that I went on is definitely a hiking trail. You definitely want to have a little older kids or be prepared to pack them because there's a lot of ups and downs. There's actually a couple of trails that required quite a bit of effort to go up and down them depending on where you went. So definitely something to consider. But their park facilities themselves, the playground is literally 4 swings. That's all it is. And of course, there's a very large picnic area that's very nice. But other than that, just be prepared for that when you come.
One thing I didn't discuss was the visitor center, which has a lot of good information for probably kids aged about 8 to 12. This has a lot of information about the Texas history, the wildlife, and the Native American life that lives in the area.
Park itself has really nice campgrounds. They all seem to be relatively identical. Some are pull-through and some are back end. They all seem to be 30 amp. I didn't see any 50 on the mark, but there may be some, and I didn't see any that had full hookups. And throughout the park, there's constant no gray water, no black water dumping except at the dump station, so it's very possible they don't have any actual full sewage here. But don't quote me on that. I didn't research that too hard, but they all seem to be very nice. I didn't have any trouble with mine. The only issue I did have was the water faucet on mine had kind of a weird spigot that did not accept my hose, or at least my regulator, very well. So I had that issue, I had a little leakage going on. And I had another problem that I'm gonna put a video out for other GeoPro owners that have an issue with their first deal. I had a water pump not pumping, it was constantly pumping air, and after a bunch of research and finally figured out where it's at, it's not in the manual, I finally figured out where the pump's located, and I was able to work it out within about 3 seconds of figuring all that out. So mine is a pull-through site, and like I said, other than back in and pull in, they all seem to be relatively identical. It's going to be a standard camp pad that I see a lot of people using. Apparently, since these sites are all the same, a lot of people camp in a standard pad. And also, of course, it comes with your typical Texas State Park fire ring and park bench. Thanks for watching my video breakdown of the Mckinney Falls State Park, located just south of Austin, Texas. If you did like the video, be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel for more content. As always, if you would, put comments and questions below. I'll be sure to answer them in any way that I can. This is Jesse with the Wandering Mantis, signing off.